You guys ever wonder what happens to a patient after an amputation? Well, stay tuned to find out. Hey guys, welcome to another LitReview where I dumb down scientific journal articles to my level. So today, I'm going to be reviewing a classic paper. It's titled Energy Cost of Walking of Amputees, the Influence of Level of Amputation. And it is authored by Waters and other authors, and it is from Rancho Los Amigos. What does it say? Rancho Los Amigos Hospital in Downey. So this is one of those classic papers where they evaluate energy costs after an amputation. And as you guys know, there are different types of amputation. Depending on the severity of the pathology, you could get an amputation that is above the knee, obviously, which is basically around, you cut across the quadricep muscles, or below the knee, which cut across the tibia and the fibula, and a side amputation, which is basically the ankle joint. Anything after the tibia, you get rid of it, but you preserve the fat pad so they can walk on it. So those are the three type of amputation that this journal article looked at. And they wanted to do this study because there hasn't been any other study that actually quantifies the energy consumption with a large enough population size to kind of definitively prove it. So they wanted to evaluate energy costs in a way about for these amputees after an amputation at three different levels. So what they did was, as a control group, they had, I believe, 10 from each decade, meaning they had 10 people that were normal, healthy, from 30 years old. They had 40 people, 40 years old that were 10 40 years people. They had 10 50 years old people. They had 6 50 years old people, and they had 10 70 years old people, versus a 70 unilateral amputee that are relatively healthy, meaning that they are amputees who gotten used to the prosthesis. They are amputees who has no pain when they're walking on their stump. And what they did was they basically allowed these patients, this control group, and the amputees to walk. And they could either, there are two scenarios where they were taking data. One scenario was they were just taking data when the participants or the sample groups were walking at a just unrestrained speed, their normal walking speed. And then the second time they're measuring their fastest velocity, their fastest gait. And another separate comparison that they did is, even within the amputee group, they also divided into two different groups. They split into two. One, vascular amputation, and the other one was traumatic amputees. And traumatic amputee is what it sounds like, people who lost or amputated their limb because of traumatic events, such as really bad car wreck where you just the leg is completely crushed and you can't salvage anything, then you just cut closest to the point where you can save the most limb. Versus a vascular amputation is more of a older people who have other comorbidities maybe that result in poor circulation, and ultimately the necrotic tissue goes out of control and you have to cut the limb to save the body. So what they found out after they looked at these people walk, they obviously found out, you could have guessed, the control group has the fastest walking speed. Or you could look at the walking speed as a cadence, meaning how many steps you take per minute. So the cadence for control, side amputees, below the knee amputees, and above the knee, or respectively 116 per minute, 98, 87, and 72. So meaning as you go from most distal amputation, or the least amount of limb loss, which is side, you have relatively fast, compared like 98, and then if you cut down the foot and part of the leg, which is below the knee amputee, then you end up with 87 steps per minute. And then above the knee is 72 steps per minute, which is the slowest out of the group. And that kind of makes sense because as you lose more of your body, you're going to lose more of your function, is the way I like to think about it. And this paper is kind of to quantify that aspect, how much loss of limb really results in affecting kinematics or energy consumption. So how do they really measure energy consumption? The way they measure energy consumption is they uptake, how much oxygen is consumed per minute, and what they call it, the rate of energy expenditure is basically the oxygen consumed per minute. And then the energy cost per meter they also measure was oxygen consumed per meter they walked. And then the relative energy cost is basically the oxygen uptake divided by the maximum ability to perform. So before I get into it, I should explain the way they measured oxygen consumption is basically using like a modified Douglas bag, what they said, but based on the diagram, it just looks like a basic spirometry device where they measure oxygen intake and carbon dioxide intake and outtake, basically. But out of the three things that they measured, I really want to focus on the relative energy cost, which is the ratio of oxygen uptake divided by maximum ability to perform. And maximum ability to perform is basically maximum aerobic capacity. Basically, if you given a person like me, how much aerobic capacity can I perform in a given time, right? Given in a given task, and how much energy do I need to spend to perform that task is what it is. So basically, relative energy cost, oxygen uptake, how much energy aka is spent to perform a certain task. So oxygen uptake can be increased if there are certain ways to increase your oxygen uptake. You breathe heavily, you breathe more at a faster rate, you're pumping heart in a bigger volume is one way. And the maximum ability to perform is where you are is kind of a fixed value where it depends on your state. Obviously, if you have a healthy person, the maximum ability to perform, the aerobic capability is going to be bigger versus an unhealthy person who is kind of overweight, who lives a sedentary lifestyle. The obvious the capability will be different between those two individuals. So keep that in mind. Keep that in your mind as we go discuss the results. So what they found out was the mean value of relative energy cost for just an unrestrained walking for just control group was 38%. So they basically, the way you look at it is, in order to accomplish their walking task, they use 30% of their energy. And for some amputees, they spend 43%, and below the knee amputee, they spend 42%. So they're some amputees and below the knee amputees are extremely similar. 1% difference, I'm not even sure if that was statistically significant. Now, for above the knee amputees, it was 63%. So which is significantly higher than the rest of them. And keep this value in mind because I think these values are often discussed in a professional setting because above the knee amputees is significantly higher than 50%. And that 50% is important because the authors on the paper talk about how if you're doing a relative any activities that are below the 50% threshold of the relative cost, then your body is basically doing an aerobic mechanism to produce ATP. Your normal, like 32 ATP per glucose molecule, whatever. I could be mistaken. I took biochemistry quite a while ago, 1-2 years. But so that mechanism produces enough ATP to sustain you through that activity. But if you go above the 50% threshold, which is in the case for above the knee amputee, with 63%, then you start tapping into anaerobic mechanism, which produces the least amount of ATP with the most inefficient way to produce ATP. And they even said that they produce 1/19 of the ATP compared to the aerobic, which is basically 5%, which is extremely terrible, extremely inefficient way to produce ATP. And that's the key here. And then they also compared how they would put these amputees on crutches versus a prosthesis. And what they found out is it doesn't matter where you got your limb amputated. If you go onto a crutches, you just spend more energy, obviously, because crutches are hard to use, and also your heart rate goes insanely up. Like it was above like 125 or something like that for all group. But after you give them back their prosthesis, which they're used to walking on, their heart rate obviously all goes down, with an exception of above the knee amputation. So what I didn't mention all the results, but what I noticed is some amputation and below the knee amputation are kind of comparable. They're kind of similar. The values don't really deviate much from each other. The effect that you're going to get from some amputees is kind of similar to the effect that the below the knee amputees will get. But for above the knee amputees, they're kind of the outcasts. They're significantly far worse than the below the knee and the side amputees. So keep that in mind. And like I said again, just want to reiterate, after the participant got back into the prosthesis, their heart rate were able to go down, except for above the knee amputee. So for them, it doesn't even matter if they're using prosthesis or crutches. They're just expending so much energy, where their body is basically overworking. So as a discussion, I think like that I got out of is prosthesis works. I knew that they work because like I read stories where some of the Paralympians would be using those artificial limbs and they could even run faster than a normal athletes. I could be wrong, but I think like there's a titanium little curved bar that stores elastic energy and basically propel them even further on, give them speed boosts essentially. So again, prosthesis works, and crutches definitely they are hard to use. But one main thing that I want you guys to take away from this article is that no matter where you got amputated, all the amputees adjusted their gait velocity, how fast they walk. They have different speed of walking, but how fast they walk to sustain or make that relative energy consistent throughout. What that means is that, remember, the relative energy cost is the oxygen consumption over the work that they're doing. So since they can't really control the maximum aerobic capacity used, because that's based on their physiology and just their natural state, they can control the oxygen consumption. And in order to kind of keep that relative cost low, like 38% of a control group, they need to reduce the oxygen uptake. And how they do that is by walking slow, so that they don't overexert their body in a way. That's why the cadence speed for the amputees are obviously all slow compared to the control group. And that purpose is to basically keep the relative cost of energy expenditure kind of same throughout the whole experiment. Try to keep it low as possible, close to the 38% of a non-amputated participant. So I think that was pretty cool. And obviously the above the knee amputee is kind of an exception, where it's pretty bad if you get an above the knee amputation. You can't really do much. One other thing that the author mentioned is that above the knee amputation is hard to recover, not only because just their energy, so much energy that they're expending, but the population of above the knee amputees are different than below or side. And in a way that they are generally bigger, they generally live a sedentary lifestyle, and it's just hard for them to walk around, and that exacerbates the situation of trying to get out of that state. So I think that was pretty interesting. So I think it was interesting. So just remember the normal relative cost for the unrestrained walking is 38%. For side amputation, it's 43%. For below the knee, it's 42%, which is kind of weird. Technically, below the knee amputation should be higher, but they're relatively basically the same. And above the knee is 63%. Now, you could take the difference of those percentages and kind of say, hey, if you get a below the knee, you're more likely to spend what, like 42 minus 38 is like 5. You're more likely to spend 5% more energy relative cost when you get below the knee. So you could get those numbers that people talk about, and also that people who are amputated walk slower to maintain relative cost of expenditure as low as possible. I think that was the key. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please remember to subscribe and leave me a comment below to let me know how I can improve, or also if you have any suggestion of other journal articles that I should review. Thanks again for watching, and come back next time for a different lit review.